Thank you for joining us, and welcome to this evening's program, Artificial Intelligence, Living in a George Jetson World. It's hosted by the Johns Hopkins Alumni Association, and I am Efrem Epstein. You can call me F. I'm class of 1990. I was a sociology major at Hopkins. I'm currently the VP of Communications at Throughways. I have spent the last 3 decades as a marketing communications professional, including service in the digital transformation space. And let me introduce to you our incredible panelists tonight. Our panel members include Bill Kirst. He's class of 2000. He is an experienced, sought-after change management expert. He's a member of the JHU Alumni Council. He's a podcast host. He's a veteran. Thank you for that, Bill. And Bill has worked across a breadth of industries and currently works at Adobe. Alex Sharpe, class of 1995. You got his master's from Hopkins in 1995. He's a long-term governance, digital transformation, and privacy expert with real-world operational experience. He has run business units. He's influenced national policy and is recognized as a top world expert in AI. Dr. Charles Johnson-Bey, he's class of 89. He was a class above me. I used to watch him on the football field at Hopkins. Dr. Johnson-Bey is a senior vice president for Booz Allen Hamilton, where he develops and executes innovative technology strategies. He has over 25 years of engineering experience in developing emerging technologies. And before we start this, I want to acknowledge Kate Sperber. I know some of you may have been tuning in to see her. We were really looking forward to speaking with her. She is amazing. She had something come up, so she sadly cannot join us tonight, and no one is more upset about us than us. But she is great, and we look forward to speaking with her again in the future, maybe when we do a panel again. I want to now turn our program over to Bill and Alex. They're going to shed some light on the Jetsons connection and how the AI of today is beginning to shape the world of tomorrow. Bill, you want to take this one?
Absolutely. Thank you, Efrem, and good evening, all. It is great to join you from Seattle, Washington. So let me set a little context for you. Thank you for joining all of us tonight. The title of this panel is Living in a George Jetson World. The reason we decided to go with this was there's so much change happening around us with AI. You can't really pass a day without some news story taking your attention about AI. And we were talking as a group of alumni around the world about this, and we realized that if you watched the Jetsons, the cartoon, maybe when you were younger, the internet actually tells us that George Jetson was born on July 31st, 2022. So the George Jetson we knew in the cartoon was probably about 40 years old. So as you remember some of the technologies that were displayed and shown in this cartoon, while we don't have things like flying cars yet, we do have a lot of things that were showcased in the show, in the Jetson home even. So a couple things we do have that we saw in the show. We have now holograms. We've seen celebrities and artists who have passed, and their holograms are used on stage. We have AI-generated digital replicas of human personalities. We have personal intelligence. We have robot vacuums. The list goes on. And one of the things we thought was, as these technologies continue to be in our day-to-day, it's important to have conversations about how we're using this technology. So we wanted to come together and ask some really critical questions about this. And that's why we're honored to be here with all of our background. Alex, I'd love to hear from you in terms of someone who stays so close to this digital transformation and guides people through this as well. When we come together to talk about this, what's top of mind for you as we jump into some of these questions? I think you're on mute.
All right, that was a hardware problem. So
see, technology.
There you go. The error is always between the keyboard and the back of the chair, right? So thank you for teeing it up that way. This stuff is really kind of amazing in a lot of ways. If you recall, the conversation started because we met on a panel in May of 2022. It was May the 4th. May the 4th be with you in terms of Star Wars. And we were talking about how what we saw in Star Wars was really happening because of the pandemic, right? Because we had the holograms, we had the video conferencing, we had the remote working, and there's a lot in there. And it kind of talked into other things. And when you look at the Jetsons, you did a great job framing that up. What I think is interesting in a lot of ways is going back in history. The cartoon was created in the 60s. It predicted a lot of technology that we are living in today and has evolved. But if you think about it, a lot of what they were talking about and predicting, forecasting the future, was only created like 10 years before. So let's think about AI for a second. The term actually came about because of a paper written by Alan Turing. And those of you who have seen the movie The Imitation Game, that was Alan Turing. And the movie was actually named after his paper that talked about artificial intelligence. But going back even further, the initial thoughts around that were actually created by Ada Lovelace before the US Civil War, right? And that was all mechanical, right? We weren't even predicting the digital age we live in. And that's a history, right? That's the history of technology. And that's a lot of the reasons for the Jetsons, right? Jules Verne in the 1800s predicted space travel, right? He predicted a lot of flying machines, right? There was no airplanes at the time, right? He talked about all that. And we have seen that time and time again with history. So, part of the question becomes, how much have we seen through the Jetsons and other things, Star Wars, 2001 Space Odyssey, pick your favorite. How much have we seen is really inspirational and helping us guide our thoughts, and how much of it is predicted, right? Predicting the natural evolution.
We all plus Kate, we're together on May 4th, 2022. We were talking about Star Wars and basically then I think we said, if ever we talk again, we should talk about the Jetsons. And that led to a whole thing. And Bill, you mentioned July 31st, 2022. These things started last year on the internet about what day was George Jetson born, and nobody could seem to agree. Somebody came up with a theory that was July 31st, 2022. There's another theory on the internet that it's August 22nd, 2022. And people can Google if they really want to geek out and see which one seems more plausible. But the idea is that the Jetsons, the show launched in 1962 and it was supposed to be a world in 2062. And they said if George is about 40, he must have been born in 2022. Yeah, as you said, we don't have the flying cars yet. We do have many other things that were showcased in the Jetsons home. Quick hot takes. I know you did some of them, but I want to hear from CJ as well. Quick hot takes. Where are we on AI? We've talked about where we were. And and I think we'll get to about where we're going. But quick hot takes, where are we now? CJ, do you want to open up?
Sure.
This one?
Yeah, and thanks, F. And honestly, it's just really my pleasure to be hanging out with you guys again. We really did have a great time on the last panel, talking about Star Wars, and now we're talking about George Jetson and preparing for this. I've been looking at George Jetson cartoons on Boomerang. Not that I needed an excuse to do that, but I watched it anyway. And thanks everyone, because I think we may have maybe 100 people on here or something. So thanks everybody for taking your time out in the evening to speak with us. So one of the things that I'm going to hit just on some of the things that, like where we are today, when you look at the fact that we have drones and smartwatches and flat screen TVs. I mean, I remember carrying, helping my pop carry these big, heavy cathode ray tubes, up and down. And, and they were only about 13 inches, but they weighed about 100 pounds. And so we're up to, I don't even know what it is, 85 inches or so plus of TVs right now that are flat screen. But you see that throughout the Jetsons, and you see also something I think that is pretty timely. We have post-COVID working hours. So I did geek out and did some searching around, and it said that George works for 2 days a week as a digital index operator. So, he went into the office 2 days a week. It's plenty of people who are doing that now and aren't going in 5 days. So that's post-COVID working hours. So we see that as well. And then the other thing I'll say that, just like we're doing now, just these video calls, right? I mean, this thing is happening. This is part of our culture now. This is part of what we do. And then I'd like people to really think about the fact that, again, going back to Bill's statement of if it is 40 years ahead, when George Jetson is about 40 during the cartoons, think about what's going to happen over the next 40 years. What are some of the kids who were born last year and this year? What are they going to do? What are they going to see? And when you look at things like the generative AI that sort of took off in a 9-month period, it went from only the geeks and nerds knew about it to everybody knowing about it and using it in a very short time frame. Think about the different technologies that are going to come together over that time.
Yeah, I think I was going to say, I think the other piece of that is, let's jump off on ChatGPT for a second. ChatGPT really, for whatever reason, became mainstream and popular and created a lot of interest. And other than lots of marketing dollars, I'm not exactly sure why, but it did. And, this stuff has been around for a very long time. We talked about 70 years ago when Turing first put this together and he first got his funding. But many of the algorithms we're using today were actually created in the 80s. And a lot of it required data to become reality. And now it's become popular. Kind of like the internet's been around since the 60s, and then people suddenly invented it one day. Kind of amazing. But when I look at like the Jetsons as a model, what I see is the applications of the technology and the different versions of AI that are embedded and cooperate together. Like you look at Rosie, their maid. She had GPS, she had visual recognition, she had voice, she could translate human voice and process it. She had all these things going on. And the reality is, except for very discrete lab applications, the AI we have today really exists, in discrete pieces. Some things like you use with Alexa when it hears your voice. It's got the voice recognition. It knows how to translate that to text, to perform a search and then read it out to you. But those are still discrete pieces, right? When you look at it where we've got the mechanical and the digital processing and the data analytics all going together, that's very encouraging to me. I would like to see us get to that point. And the other thing about the Jetsons is it's not dystopic. Right. It's not projecting a negative future. It's really, there's a lot of advantages, because of the technology. It's very futuristic.
Bill, any additional thoughts? Okay.
No, I think he covered it.
Okay. So, moving on from there, Alex, you mentioned that some of that Jetsons is kind of a shiny view of the future, but there are a lot of movies that don't present such a shiny view of the future of AI, like The Terminator, like 2001. The list goes on and on. Are these cautionary tales, or could this really happen? And if the answer is yes, well, then what can we do to prevent these leak scenarios from becoming a reality? I realize that this is a long question and we're not going to solve all the world's problems tonight. But maybe just some quick thoughts on that. Bill, you want to start off with this one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I actually was recently speaking to some college seniors and freshmen about AI, and this question came up. right? The dystopian versions of things that are sometimes portrayed in movies. And you mentioned a few of them, right? The Terminator, Skynet, Shall We Play a Game in War Games, right? The Ultimate Computer in Star Trek. I recently saw the movie The Creator, which is about AI accidentally launching a weapon, and doing a lot of damage to humanity. I think as I step back and assess these media representations of this technology and the what if scenarios, one of the things I try to do is listen and go to the source as much as possible. So recently, just this past week, actually, at Wall Street Journal Live, Sam Altman and Mira Murati, she's the CTO at OpenAI, he's the CEO, they were posed this question, this very question about dystopian, cautionary tales. And Sam, I really like sometimes how Sam thinks about this, because he does a lot of discernment. And I think as Hopkins alumni, we can appreciate the power of discernment. And here's the thing, it takes work. It takes a lot of investigation and a lot of analysis to not jump to a conclusion. And so some of the things I reflected on was that he thinks there is a chasm that exists, between things like you said, Alex, hyper personalization, right? The ability to bring things to me when I need it so it understands me. And also suggestive persuasion, right? The danger of deep fakes. These are real things. And we could have entire panels just about that. And also, dystopian derailments is kind of what he calls it. And I do think it's upon us as consumers, but also as citizens, to kind of shine some light on the moral challenges that exist, but not also get caught up in the sort of phantasmic part of this, which is a lot for entertainment. Now, I do believe that entertainment makes you think, right? Jetsons is case in point. We're all talking about it. It's entertainment. It's fun to watch, but it generated for all of us a different way of thinking about those things that are around us. And as Alex said, it's how we integrate this technology into our lives. So it is imperative that we don't get complacent about it. And the technology we're using, like, we have to start to determine, like, who are we as a result of it? And who are we when we learn from it? And also, what is our human consciousness, right? And we'll probably get into that a little bit with some of the things we're seeing, because I think some of that's being spliced a little bit, right? Where we end and where it begins. Somebody asked a question the other day to Sam in that panel, what makes us human? And Sam's answer was emotion. And I think that was really powerful.
Thank you, Bill. CJ, thoughts?
Sure. So a great answer, Bill. So dystopian movies are so great to me. I really do like them because they make us think about what can happen when we don't focus on loving humanity and taking care of our environment. And it may sound, all apple pie and motherhood, but I 100% believe that. And although the movies may have us believe that everything is about power and money, I believe that there are many people around the globe that want to make the world a better place, right? How do we, it's a lot of things going on in the world today, and how can we use technology to help it be better, to help us understand grace? We talk about what makes us human is emotion, that emotion of grace and being there for each other. I think technology has a place there. And I'm certainly placing my bet on, AI technologies helping us spend more time helping each other and getting the planet sort of better, because there's some things that are going on that we can do better. So I think, again, just getting back to the topic of the dystopian movies, I like them because they make us think. They make us think about, and if you don't want what you see, then let's work together to make it better.
So much with that. I actually remember watching The Terminator when I was a freshman at Hopkins. I think it was in Schaffer Hall. And I remember that going through my head saying, wait a second, could this happen? If so, how would we react? Alex, thoughts?
This one question, this one topic, we could spend an entire hour on and still not hit all the dimensions. And it's incredibly important. If you look at it, these dystopic kind of views are cautionary tales. And the way Bill framed it, I think, was excellent. It causes us to be wary of how things can go wrong. And when it comes to AI, we have a couple of little pieces there. If you look at the history of when this stuff happens, there's an excellent quote by the former head of DARPA. She's now principal advisor to the president on AI. She talks about when AI goes wrong, it goes wrong in ways a human never would. And in my experience, she is absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Continuing down that theme, Bill and CJ both brought up the human side of it. And if you look at where these things go wrong in these movies, what brings them back and saves the day is often going back to emotions and what solves it all. Like Hal, when he was being slowly turned off, he starts talking about his birthday, right? That's a little subtlety in the movie, but Arthur C. Clarke put that in there because of the human aspect. And then you look at George Hinton, Jeff Hinton, I'm sorry, the father of artificial intelligence as we know it today, actually machine learning. He talks about these models becoming sentient where they can think, but he always stops short of the human aspect, right? So maybe that is our key, right? That is not only what makes us human, but it's also the thing that's going to keep us from not letting the genie get too far out of the bottle.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, the three of you all know way more about AI than I do, but my quick thought on AI has often been that if if we're still not getting autocorrect right, if it's still not known there, I mean, both from a bad and a good, I'm like, I mean, maybe it makes it less scary, but it also means that it makes me trust a little bit less. I mean, that was just a side thing, but anyone take any quick reactions to my side point?
You're not lying. That's all I'll say. It's, autocorrect, like we're correcting autocorrect. I know I do that more, and I can't even spell that great. I can add, subtract, multiply, and divide, but I'm finding myself trying to correct autocorrect all the time. So you certainly have a point. And I think the other point of the matter is it's still a long way to go. Alex talked a lot about things have been around for a while, and it takes a while sometimes for things to get right and perfected, and we're far from it.
Oh God, if you look at the sheer numbers about the levels and the amount of data that are in these machine learning networks, these things, they don't even scratch the depth that we have as humans. And we still don't know as humans how our brains work and how we can store all the information and how we can create the linkages. And only in the past few years have we come to realize that the pathways that we build in our brains can actually be modified over time. It was only 5 years ago, or maybe 7, I don't know the exact number, that we thought that they were there for life. So it shows that we as humans are constantly learning, and the more we learn, the easier it is for us to learn. So getting those models to catch up is going to take a real long time. Thank God. We all need the work.
Yeah, I think this one is near and dear to my heart because I recently actually just published my first book of poetry, and I'm not even kidding you. This wasn't planned, but one of my poems is called "We Fight the Autofill." Because of this point that we just raised. And I feel like there's this tension that we have with the autocorrects and the autofills. And that's again a whole nother discussion around data, but it brings up this really interesting question around fate and power, like willpower, right? Because if we think about it, this autocorrect, this auto prompt, this autofill is as you discussed, Alex, it's truncating our neural pathways. And so I wrote this poem that sort of came to me almost in a rebellious way called We Fight the Autofill. And it felt really good to publish it.
You got to share. You have to share it.
I will find a way to do that. Yeah. You want me to read it now?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. I will do that. We are totally going off script. Here we go. All right.
Wait. The audience is now like in the chat. No, please, no.
It's short. I'll only do a portion of it.
No, go ahead. I'm only kidding, Bill.
Yeah. So I appreciate that, CJ. I literally had to pull it up because we weren't planning to go here. But it starts off with, isn't every entry a tug of war with a wiser machine? Suggestions aren't supposed to be shaping, but it feels like it's just excavating and eviscerating. Me, if not for my words, my purest thoughts unheard, then who am I left to be in the sea of soliloquy? I'll leave it at that.
That feels like Ginsberg. It's very Ginsberg-esque.
Yeah, because think about it. When we go into ChatGPT, right, we are essentially having a very vast soliloquy experience. And it continues to shape. And this is why we're having discussions around this. And this is why I believe these technologies will teach us more about our human consciousness than we ever could have imagined. It's not lost on me that Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, when he tried out ChatGPT for the first time, before he made the investment to it, the first thing he put into it was a poem by Rumi. And he said, I want you to translate it into this language, which was an Indian language. And it did it. So to me, that's really interesting. Here's a tech CEO who's trying out a technology that's going to change the world. And he starts with poetry. That gives me hope.
I'm wondering if AI could do something for me right now that can go back. If AI can go back in time a half hour ago when I introduced you, Bill, and I said you were all these things, said you were a veteran, said you were a podcast host, a change management expert, and can add poet to that. I mean, because that should have been in there. That was wonderful. And I'm really excited with how great, with really the talent level of this panel. I'm far and away the least talented person here. We know technology changes the way we work and live. We've talked a little bit about that. Disruptions from AI are broader and different. And one thing that we should mention is that in the past, disruption has come really to, I think, blue collar jobs first, often. This is kind of one thing that's a little bit different, and maybe this is turnaround fair play. It's AI seems to be affecting white collar jobs first before blue collar jobs. And I'm wondering what everyone's thoughts are about the entire thing about how AI is going to disrupt work. Alex, you want to start off with this one?
Sure. Let's go back in history a little, because I have a bad habit of doing that. I think it's important to look back so you can see forward better. If you look at all of human history, the people who study this, who are mostly economists, will tell you most of human productivity is driven by technology. And I often talk about how the technology evolves, right? Because at one point, the most valuable person in the cave was probably the person who could build fire. Today, that has become as much of a commodity as anything can, because you flick a lighter, you turn a knob, you do whatever. And you look at major points in history, we've seen this time and time again. And there's very well-known things that occur in the adoption phase, right? Only 1 out of 20 people actually embraces change. Everybody else is like, no, and we're afraid of it and we're excited. There's always stuff that comes out. When trains first came around, people said that, oh, this would never be practical because, humans can't survive anything faster than 35 miles an hour. And I guarantee you everybody here has done far and above that, even on Route 95, right? We've all been past that. So we know these trends. The most disruptive thing that seems to be happening right now is exactly what you said, F. It's attacking white collar in ways we've never seen before, right? It's typically blue collar, and it's not touching blue collars in a bad way. What's interesting, though, on the blue collar jobs and blue collar work, it seems to be giving them more an advantage over white collar. And CJ can build out on this far better than I can, because he's got more of a depth and spends time with it every day. But there's a lot of advances in education that are really going to help the blue collar workers of the world, right? We also see a lot of the truly mundane, low-paying jobs are starting to get taken over by technology, which have historically kept people locked in, and it's allowing us to reach other markets, right? And also there's even, without going through it, there's some stuff that's actually looking at how we can make inflation adjustments based on zip code or even city blocks, which would help people in more disadvantaged areas, right? Or just, there's a lot of opportunities here. One thing I'll say before I go, Oxford University put some really good studies together on this stuff. They're usually wrong when they project out a number of years about what's going on. And in retrospect, it makes sense why, but directionally they're correct, right? So about 10 years ago, they put one together that talked about how jobs going, 25% of all jobs that white collar jobs we know of will be gone, and this, that, and the other thing. And what would happen to salaries? Well, we've had so much quantitative easing, it just disrupted all that. But where they are correct in all of the things that they're looking at is technology, especially AI, is disrupting white collar workers in ways we've never experienced, and frankly, we don't know how to handle. I would love to hear what CJ and Bill have to say with that, especially CJ, because he deals with this every day, personally and professionally and privately.
Yeah, CJ, love to hear.
Oh, thanks, Alex. So this is a really great question, and I'm going to talk about this from an education standpoint. And education, training, retraining, reskilling, I think all of these things are going to be very hot topics and needed. Like, we talked a little bit earlier about how some people are afraid of AI and say, oh, maybe we should stop it, let's not use it. That's not the way. This is a tool to help. And so I think that there are, certainly there are people who are working in this education and training space on how to use this, to help people learn, understand, and get better at their jobs. And quite honestly, they're going to be jobs tomorrow that's going to have names and functions that we can't even fathom today. So, we've got to always stay on top of sort of, and I really think about, I break it down to the function, what is needed, what needs to get done, and then who do we have to best do this, and let's go forward. So one of the things that I'll mention is that there was an AI education conference just yesterday. It was put on by EdTech. I'm not affiliated with EdTech in any way, but the reason why I bring this up is because they were focusing on education in the age of AI. And their conference proclaims that AI is here to stay and it's going to have a really seismic impact on the education landscape, and is only starting just to come into focus. So they had sessions on AI teaching assistants, AI personalized learning paths and study tools, as well as a 2040 vision that was forecasting AI's transformative role in education. So I think that more tools will be developed to help people learn and study and adapt. The other thing that I think is going to be critical, again, one of the earlier comments, we were talking about sort of the speed at which, like a chat GPT, and specifically in generative AI as a whole, sort of caught on, and that was a pretty quick time frame. But when you start looking at now these various different technologies that are coming to play, where the integration time is going to be quicker than it's ever been in the history of the world, I think that's going to prove to be some very challenging things. So I think that education itself is going to have to go through disruption. I'm sure I'm going to say that again because I'm high on this just education piece, and I think AI and understanding it is pretty important. So the next thing I'll say is that this generation really is going to build the world that they want, right? And I'm going to do a quote. I'll end sort of what I'm going to say here with a quote from an American philosopher and longshoreman, Eric Hoffer, which is, "In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists."
Wow.
Beautiful.
Bill?
I mean, how do you follow that, right? But I just have to start by saying I did not expect this panel to have philosophers and poets in it. And I am so glad that it does. This was unplanned, because I think what we're saying here is these are going to be the things that are our touchstones, that are our guideposts through this, because it is our humanity that we're talking about. I agree with CJ. You know, the youth are learning for their world.
Mhm.
And AI as a tutor to help you work out loud to make sense of a problem that you otherwise struggle with because of either, learning patterns or rigid neuro, challenges. I think that's a good thing. I mean, notice I didn't say it gives you the answer, because I'm one of those people that was not great at math, but I was always one of those people that enjoyed it when you work out loud, right? You show your work in the margins. For those of you that remember, in primary school or middle school, show your work in the margins and you get credit. I always enjoyed that because that showed the teacher how I thought. And then the teacher could meet me and say, well, how did you get here? How did you get there? I think that's what people are doing with some of this technology. And I think where people have, shortcomings, this will augment that for them. I mean, some of the world's most renowned experts in AI have even used ChatGPT to help write books about it, right? Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn wrote a book and used ChatGPT to help him. Now, I will also be clear, I'm always on the side of creators and authors and songwriters and actors. We don't have to get into all that SAG after strike stuff, but I support all of that because their world is being disrupted too. I actually write about this monthly in a LinkedIn newsletter called Leading Change in the Era of AI, because these topics are complex, right? Next week, the president is coming out with an executive order about AI and regulation. There have been at least 4, maybe 5 or 6, including the closed door sessions on Capitol Hill with technology leaders talking about this. But because not a lot of people have time to watch C-SPAN for hours, I watch them and I discern the information and I put it in a digestible newsletter so that people can be informed and make decisions as they're using this technology. And I think if we're going to integrate this technology ethically, then we have to prompt more for creation and philosophers and poets. And I think it could be a really good thing. It is disruptive, but I think we could learn more about our humanity.
Thank you. We're going to we're moving along the hour. This has been a great conversation. We could probably go twice as long, but we only have a certain amount of time. And we do want to get to we're getting some great questions and we want to get to them. Before we get to the questions, I want to do 2 quick points that people can react to or not, because both these things relate to these things each got brought up. First off, CJ brought up about education. So being that this is a Hopkins panel, I just want to quickly acknowledge, and maybe we react, maybe not, quickly acknowledge that our alma mater has recently launched several new AI-related projects, made them very exciting, and people can Google more, including the Center for Digital Health and Artificial Intelligence at the Carey School of Business, the AI Foundry, hyphenated Foundry, and there are also some AI education opportunities for undergrads going on, which I know the Hopkins newsletter wrote about a few weeks ago. And I just think it's important to mention that in there. And I wish that we could probably spend an hour talking about all those things, but people want to know more. By all means, they should go and look them up. And something we talked that got, I think Alex maybe teased a little bit about this, about ways that AI is affecting work. Kind of interesting. We all are familiar with the fact about the work from home and how that was really drawn down with COVID. There was an article that I saw in the Washington Post earlier this week. I don't know if anyone else saw it, about how AI is actually putting new life into downtown San Francisco. That basically downtown San Francisco was basically quiet because of a lot of things that happened in COVID. And now AI and the excitement about AI is basically bringing new life into it. And so before we take does anybody want to react to either of those points before we go to viewer questions?
I think part of it, F, is again back to this thing that CJ pronounced so well, which is the youth of this world is creating the world they want to see. So while we all saw trends, during pandemic where people did leave some urban hubs, you can hear this. Sam Altman talks about it. I think OpenAI just recently invested and bought a building in in the Mission District within San Francisco for this exact reason. To attract the talent you need to solve these problems, you have to have a space and a place to collaborate. You have to create community. We cannot solve these problems individually. If we do, we're going to make mistakes. We have our own biases. Remember, bias is just a shortcut in the brain. And if we're not careful, we're going to create large language models, we're already seeing it, that are based on our biases. So coming together, I do see some urban centers, including Seattle, including San Francisco, Washington, D.C. Johns Hopkins just opened 555 Pennsylvania Avenue, the Bloomberg Center, tucked right between Capitol Hill and the White House. There's going to be a lot of discussions there around topics like this. So I think it's because the youth want to create the world they're in, and they need to do it together.
I think I'm going to throw out two little dot points, not talk about them long, because I want to give CJ a little more airtime and then hit the audience questions. But there was a study done it started prior to COVID and done by another university, so I'm not going to mention it, but it says working remotely through video actually produces 20% less ideas. That's a sustainable number. And the beauty of that study, I believe, is because it was actually done before it started before COVID, so they could actually collect data through the change, right? And if you look at all innovation comes out of collaboration and diversity of thought and all of that. So the stuff we're talking about creating community and diversity, from all the different dimensions is very, very key to all that. It's very, very important. Then I'll stop there. Go ahead, CJ. I'll give you a little more time and we'll get to some more audience questions.
Before we go to CJ, Alex, can you mention what the university was? Because I think one of the things that's great about education versus corporations is that we are all collaborators as opposed to corporation where we weren't.
Okay, it was Columbia.
Okay.
And for those of you who don't know, I went to Johns Hopkins for my master's as an engineer. And then I went on to Columbia Business School. So I've got multiple logos I can wear.
And I'm a son of a Columbia University grad, and they're right nearby.
There
CJ, your thoughts?
I love it. So I'll hit two. I'm going to hit these this points from two different vantage points, and so I do love the question. I think that we and we didn't practice, just so folks know, it's not like we practiced all this. I love the fact of the organic nature of our conversations and just the poetry, the philosophy, all that. I think that's going to be more and more about what the world is about. So referencing the San Francisco piece, I think that you can't solve a problem being away from the problem. You've got to go where it is to help solve it. And I think as humans, we like being around each other. People say, I want to be home, I want to be this. But it's that thought process of being around each other, seeing everybody's faces and all that mannerism, things that aren't that you just can't get from a video. So I think I think our humanity is what's going to save us, period. And then I'll just say one last thing just on the education piece, just because I want to, is that I think the entire U.S. education system is well overdue for disruption. I think it is on its way. I'll do another quote, this one from the movie The Wire, which is, the kids are not learning for our world, they're learning for theirs. And I alluded to that in my other answer, but I love that quote from The Wire because it talks about the kids are going to learn. They're going to learn whether we want them to or not, the way we want them to or not. they're going to learn, and they're going to create that world that they need and they want. And the other thing I'll say, just in the and I will show my bias here, the ridiculousness of banning books. I mean, when you think about, okay, we're going to ban books in the world of AI, I don't know how that even works. But also, if I were to write a book on AI from my perspective, it would be banned today, more than likely. And so I think that if I write it from my perspective, I'm Black man from East Baltimore, here's how I see it. Some people might find that offensive for some reason. But again, I think, and that's why things get banned. But I think when you think about that in the context of AI, what sense does that make? And because there's a lot of voices, and the United States needs all the voices of all the kids of all the playgrounds. And I think that AI can be used as a tool to help that and not suppress it. And so that's where I think the world is going to go. And I think that is honestly what's going to save us all.
Yeah, and to Bill's point about bias, I think one of the biggest decisions we're going to have to make as a society is what biases are we going to choose? Because being human requires bias, right? We all made a bias to go to Hopkins. We all showed our bias to attend the event tonight. We could go down the very long list. The question is going to become, what bias do we choose? So
thank you, audience. You've made it very, very difficult with us because you've asked too many good questions. So we're going to do our best. One question that we're going to start off with, and being that we have a bunch of people that like talking about change management here, we're going to start off with a question from Heather. She says, companies are running to use AI to streamline processes, and she puts it in quotations, etc. Should there be some brakes on it? And should they take more time to evaluate? Bill, I'm going to guess you already have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was just talking about this with students yesterday. It's a great question. I appreciate the question because it is a truth that we cannot deny, that when you introduce these technologies, processes will be streamlined. So maybe it took somebody 6 hours to go through pivot tables in an Excel and collate information to present it in a dashboard for their leadership. Now with things like, Copilot, which Microsoft is introducing to the world next week in generative availability or general availability, it may take a few minutes. So the question then becomes for me, as I'm leading people through change, is not so much, is that a bad thing? The question is, what do you do with the hours you got back? And where do you determine value? But that's a really hard question because we're talking about people's livelihood, right? If you built a career being the go-to person, being the person that had all the tribal knowledge in your head and could be the hero, right? The corporate hero in some cases. What happens to your identity when all of a sudden all these processes are streamlined and something can be done for you? I think it creates a lot of grief. And this is where things like philosophy and poetry come into play, because we have to have those questions around, do we slow things down for the benefit of our humanity? I think this is what the executive order is going to try and start a conversation on next week. Many people saw the open letter that came from many people signed onto it, including Elon Musk, saying, should we slow down? Europe is doing a lot of work in this space saying, should we slow down? I don't know if it's going to be an answer we have today, but I personally believe, as someone who's guided people through change for 20 years, it's not necessarily about slowing down. I think it goes back to CJ's point about meeting people with grace. So if the change is going to happen to them, I don't want to deny that, but I want to meet them in a place of grace and say, how does this make you feel? And how do we make sure that you feel belonging, valued, and I can actually use your higher capacity to do better things, to create in this world? That's what we need. So that would be my answer.
CJ, Alex, either of you have any more thoughts on this?
I'm going to foot stomp on Bill. Bill did a great answer to that. Great answer. We need more creators, and there are a lot of people. I think I guess I will say that all the creators, you can't find all the creators in one space. They're all over. And so we need to be broad in our ideas on that, and we need to make sure that we've got the tools and processes to help all those that can contribute and want to contribute and help create, to help them be able to do that.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd say, put a stop, absolutely not, right? Because ignorance doesn't help anybody. You don't learn, you don't figure it out, and you run the risk of some unsavory people getting their hands on it and running amok, right? So I would not put the brakes on it. Now, I am a big advocate of choosing your use cases wisely and exploring with them in a sandbox. Because remember, when AI goes bad, it goes bad in a way a human never would have predicted. So I would absolutely not stop. But, take a hard look at the blast radius. If this goes wrong, let's make sure nobody gets hurt. And part of the scientific process that we all know is you want failure because you learn from it and you fold it forward. Right. So I would not lose any of that. But I also think it's very important. There's an old expression: you can't be promoted. If you can't be replaced, you can't be promoted. So these people that have made their lives around something, if they have that kind of skill, they have to have skills other places. And they've probably never really stretched their wings or flexed their muscles. So there's going to be a certain percentage that really won't like it, but there's others that when they, as Bill likes to say, when they can see themselves in the future, right, they're going to like it. It's going to be an expansion opportunity. It comes back to the humanity side of, helping them see that path and getting them to work through it. Understanding it's going to be more painful for some than others.
I'm going to, thanks so much. I have a question, CJ, get prepared. This is a question that I specifically have you in mind for, because I know this is right up your alley, but obviously, Alex, Bill, if you have thoughts on this as well, too. I love this question because this is a question when I read this, I'm like, darn, why didn't I think of this question when we were putting this together? It's from Cindy. She says, speaking of robotics and the Jetsons, do you think the advancement of software is outpacing the advancement of hardware? And if so, do you think that trend will continue, or will robotics catch up?
That is a great question. That's a great question. And so I'm going to answer it this way, right? Because I identify as a hardware guy, right? So I design chips, all that. So I have the hard spot, quote unquote, in my heart for hardware. So I'll say that. But I do think that software is certainly the reason why. Here's what I'm going to say: the reason why software is advancing so much is because of the advancements in hardware. What we can do when you look at, if you look at the old PDP-11s, that's probably still running on some NASA flight things now that had 8-bit words, and we're doing that. And you did a lot with the PDP-11, by the way. And when you look at things like the NVIDIA chips today, when you look at, some of those GPUs that are doing a lot more things in parallel, I think that the hardware is enabling software to grow. But also, I think, so my definition of innovation comes around your constraints. The reason why we have innovation is because we have constraints. If we had all the money, time, resources we need, we would not need to be innovative. We can just do what we want to do because we have all the things. So I think it's the constraints in hardware that actually help move forward some of the software ideas and the things that we can do. There's constant work that's going on today in the hardware space, and people are investing. When you look at, so tech had a pretty decent day today. I'm pointing at my TV because I had it on, but tech had a pretty decent day today. But if you look like a place like NVIDIA, not a commercial for NVIDIA, but when you look at their stock and what they're doing and what they're investing in, you see that moving. So I think that's a great question, Cindy, but also I think it's also going to get down to the integration of these technologies, how they converge and how they're used together. That's also going to provide further insights in things that we need to do to move it forward, move the technology as a whole forward.
Bill,
Only
thank
thing,
you so much.
only
Go
thing
ahead.
I'll add to that is this is why I love being a Hopkins grad, because I get to geek out with people like CJ, and then I'll probably set up a call with him and say, "Can we talk about quantum, computing and quantum physics?" Because your question was, Cindy, the question about hardware and software. I mean, I do think it takes us into a quantum physics thing, right? When software starts to behave like hardware and has the property of actual physical property, but is not actually manifested matter. That blows my mind sometimes. And that's also why I'm really excited to be a Hopkins alumni and have access to all these people who can geek out on that with me.
Is software outpacing hardware? Absolutely not. It's just as the hardware, and I think this is the essence of where CJ was going. As hardware gets better, software can go farther. And that's actually the historical trend, right? We had hardware long before we had semiconductors long before we ever had a lick of code. As a matter of fact, even before we had the computers that we had today, we had analog computing, right? Which really didn't have software in it, right? So software is a fairly recent invention in the computing space. So the more we do with hardware, the more we can do with software. So software tends to appear to be reaching further, but it's because it's it's standing on the shoulder of a giant who just got taller.
So we're getting very close to time. I'm going to ask one last question, and it will probably be something where the answer probably deserves 10 minutes each person, but we're going to see if the panelists can each do this in like 60 seconds or less, which is hard. It's a question from Ray, and this question I'm finding really intriguing. I think this is a great thing to end on. And once again, quick hot takes. He refers to the type of regulation that Asimov had for the 3 laws of robotics that should be developed. And he said, do you think there's some sort of something similar to AI? And the 3 laws of robotics by Asimov, I'll read them off here. Number 1, a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. Number 2, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except when such orders would conflict with the first law. And 3, a robot must protect to own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. Quick hot takes. And since I want to do this all night, the 3 panelists begin with A, B, and C. So we'll do A, B, and C. Alex, you have first, then Bill, then CJ, you get the last word, and then we'll wrap this up.
All right. Those laws, I like them. I think they're brilliant. We're probably going to have to do something like that, like I talked about guardrails. But if you look in all the movies that have ever come out, talk about dystopic, somebody always finds a way around them, right? Even in Star Wars with the clones, right? Even when it's not a pure robotic thing. So yet to be seen, but I like where you're going.
Thank you. Bill?
My take would be 2 things I've watched that made me think a lot about this. The Creator was a movie I mentioned. If you haven't seen it, it literally goes through every single one of these and plays it out. Secondly, Foundation, a show on Apple TV, which is based on an Asimov series of novels, goes through this. You will think a lot when you watch those things. Again, taking it back to entertainment and media and the role it plays for us to help stretch our brains a little bit. I would love to see these guardrails. I agree with Alex. Humans and the pursuit of power will always find ways around. We just have to make sure that we are guarding humanity so that we don't harm each other in the process.
CJ, take us home.
It is beautiful. So I'm gonna say one word. One word to as my answer to this is resilience. I think I agree with both Bill and Alex that someone will find a way. Guardrails are good. Somebody's going to try to find a way to go around, or will find a way to go around it. But the human spirit has to be resilient. And so, in spite of things getting in, we've got to keep on with our prime directive, which is taking care of each other and taking care of the planet that we live.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us for this evening's webinar. Thank you for the amazing questions. Thank you to the panelists, and you don't see them, but thank you so much to the Hopkins at Home team. They were working with us for a long period before this. They do a lot of hard work to make this possible. And seriously, so thank you to all of them, and they deserve the kudos. Looks like we're at the close of the hour. Please stay updated for other events at events.jhu.edu and the hub. We hope that you will join us for a future webinar. Good evening. Thank you. And seriously, may the force be with you.
Happy birthday, George Jetson.
Happy belated birthday.
That's right.